Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to this Driver 61 video where I'm going to analyse in depth the collision between Kevin Magnussen, Stoffel Vandoorne and Daniel Ricciardo from this weekend's Brazilian Grand Prix. Now the FIA did investigate the collision and they deemed it as a racing incident, but I'm going to take a look at frame by frame footage to analyse what really happened. Unfortunately, I can't show you the full speed footage due to FOM's copyright regulations, but I will link to the video in the description below. So here we are on board with Daniel Ricciardo. He's got quite a good start, but obviously he started in 14th, much further back than he normally would, so he's in that mid-pack carnage. So he's got to be a little bit careful, but he's also got to take some risks and try and make up as many positions as he can in the first corners and on that first lap, because it is difficult to overtake at the Interlagos circuit. So he got a reasonable start. He's up the inside here. You can see that Magnussen's just on the outside, and Vandoorne actually got a really good start and He's in the middle of the Force India and the car on the other Haas on the outside of him there. So he's got a reasonable start, but he eventually gets squeezed and has to back out of the throttle. So Ricciardo's here, coming up on the inside of turn 1, because that's where the start put him. Now the circuit begins to open out in front of him here, and he's going to drive into that space to try and make a few positions up. He knows that it's going to be a little bit risky on the outside here, especially if someone on the inside of him makes a mistake, slides out, and could run him onto the grass or even make contact with him, as of course actually happened. So he's running it around the outside here. Now he's expecting that Vandoorne's going to run him out of road, but he is far enough alongside Vandoorne so that he kind of controls the position. If Vandoorne was here, quite a long way ahead of him, of course he could just run him off the track. But Ricciardo gets far enough alongside Vandoorne to warrant running it all the way around the outside and possibly then overtake him through turn 3. As we come out here from Ricciardo's point of view, obviously we can't see as much as he can from the cockpit. He'll have some peripheral vision here where he can see where Vandoorne is. But from this point of view, he's run the car as wide as he can, but at this point already he gets a tap and it's obviously in the rear. It gives the car, if you watch the steering wheel, a kick of oversteer, causes him to spin a bit, and at this point he's really lucky not to get tagged by another car as he's spinning across the circuit. Now this view isn't particularly good. It doesn't give us a good overall view of what actually happened, so we're going to ride on board with Stoffel Vandoorne next and then take a look at an external shot which explains the situation very well indeed. So here we are on board with Stoffel Vandoorne. As you can see, he gets a reasonable start, but then in the braking zone into turn 1, he's quite brave on the brakes and goes between the Haas and the Force India on the inside, drives into the space, gets a little kick of oversteer. You can see he's right on the limit if you watch the steering wheel here. He watch the steering wheel now, he turns the car in, gets a bit of oversteer, turns it in again, just trying to rotate, as he's turning into turn 1 here, and he does a great job. He's right on the limit of the car, but keeping it safe for everyone. And then for him, things just get a little bit tight here with the Haas on the outside, and it squeezes him just a little bit, and he's got a closing gap here between the Haas and the Force India on the left hand side, so he has to back out the throttle at this point just a little bit and let them go. That kind of puts him on the back foot, and he's going to get swallowed by the other Haas on the right hand side of him, and it allows Daniel Ricciardo to come and position himself around the outside. So again, it's difficult to see from this camera angle, but he'll be aware that the Haas is on the inside and obviously that Danny Rick's on the outside. At this point here, if you look at the screen, you can see that Daniel Ricciardo, as I was saying before, is slightly ahead. So he has the high ground. He's kind of controlling the position as he's coming around the outside of turn 2 there and keeping Vandoorne from pushing him out onto the curb and onto the grass. If we move a few frames forwards here, we can just about see the Haas is just in front of Vandoorne here. Obviously, because he got squeezed in turn 1, he's got a little bit of backward momentum. He's been swallowed by the 2 cars that were behind him. But just keep your eye on Magnussen on the right hand side here. Now, to be fair to Magnussen, as you can see here, at this point here, if you just watch how quickly he comes across, he's trying to run Vandoorne out of road. And he said in an interview afterwards that he didn't know that Ricciardo was coming right around the outside. So if he didn't know that, which is completely plausible because he would have been hidden by Vandoorne. If he didn't know that, his objective is to push Vandoorne as wide as possible, try and push him onto the curbs so that he can't go through turn 3 properly, and then Magnussen can get him down the following straight. However, Vandoorne is restricted by Ricciardo on the outside of him, and that's why they all come together, because Magnussen's trying to push Vandoorne wide, but Ricciardo's stopping it all from happening. If Ricciardo hadn't have been there, Vandoorne probably would have been a little bit wider and given Magnussen a little bit more room, and then they might not have had contact. So let's just go a few frames forward. You can see here, at this point where the arrow is now, the contact with Magnussen and Vandoorne actually breaks the steering on the McLaren. And then the force pushes him into Ricciardo, which then breaks the other steering arm. And so the McLaren has no steering and sends Ricciardo over to the right-hand side, spinning across the front of Magnussen, who has also got a broken steering arm on the front left there. Ricciardo was so lucky at this point not to get collected properly by Magnussen and end his race. He was incredibly lucky at this point. So finally, we're going to take a look at some external footage which I think best explains the collision and the incident at turn 2. Just towards the back of the circle here, you can see Magnussen, Vandoorne and Ricciardo on the outside. You can see that Ricciardo's come nice and wide there. He's moving the car into the space. But if you watch Magnussen's the interesting one on the inside here, because at this point he's just driving on the normal line. He's trying to push Vandoorne out as wide as he can, as I mentioned before, and that's why the contact happens. As we move the frames forward, you can see that Magnussen's just driving on the normal line. At this point, it's obvious to see that Magnussen's on the normal line. Ricciardo's actually ahead of both of them, but it's going to be a gap that's always coming together like this. And you can see by the attitude of the car of Magnussen and Ricciardo that they're actually heading towards each other at this point, and they're just going to run out of room. Which, if we go a few frames forwards, you can see that they are. You can see at this point, if you watch Magnussen very carefully on the left-hand side, he just gets a kick of oversteer and then slides into Vandoorne. He probably expected Vandoorne to be a little bit wider because there is a bit of room there, but obviously Ricciardo's on the outside and he can't move into that space. And then they all come together and Ricciardo spins, and that's the end of 2 of their races, and it also puts Danny Ricciardo to the back of the pack. So as I mentioned, the FIA investigated it and said that it was a racing incident. And I have to agree with them. In my opinion, that is a classic example of a racing incident. 3 cars at the start coming together, all fighting each other, being quite aggressive, but there's just not enough room to get 3 cars into one. And I can't say that any one of them was really at fault. So please let me know what you think about this incident in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and whose fault you think it might have been. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.